Good morning, everyone. It is April 7th, and we have the equation now the Trump administration used to place these tariffs on other countries, these reciprocal tariffs that are causing such market volatility right now. And I wanted to take a look at the equation and break it down for you because they made it way overly complex to show what is essentially the tariff rate equals the trade deficit with another country. They have a lot of different Greek letters here to make it seem like they're doing really fancy math, but I'll break it down for you to show you that they really aren't. Starting off with the symbols. Now, the delta is a change. It's a change in math. So they are changing something which would be the tau. The tau is represented as a percent of the tariff rate. So this is going to be the change in tariff rate represented as a percent. This I matters not. It doesn't matter whatsoever. I don't know why they have it in here because it's just everywhere. It's all over. And they say it's to be the import rate. So you have X, which is exports, sub I imports. So exports, sub imports, imports, sub imports. That just doesn't make sense. This I doesn't need to be anywhere. I think they just threw it in there as a placeholder for nothing so that they look like they're doing harder math than they really are. So looking at the X, as I said, this is the number of exports that the U.S. is sending out to other countries. M is number of imports the U.S. is taking in. So X is exports, M is imports. The epsilon here and the phi, these two represent elasticity. And what elasticity is, the reaction to something. In this case, it's the reaction to the tariffs. So how the U.S. Trade Representative right here believes that things like the import demand, the amount of demand that we have on imports is going to be impacted. And then the phi is how much prices are going to be impacted by the change in tariff rate. So here the U.S. Trade Representative puts 4 and then 0.25. So this is kind of what the equation looks like right now. So let me break it down for you in layperson terms. You basically have the new percentage of tariff rate, so tariff rate percent, and that equals exports minus imports. And by the way, all of this right here is trade balance. And if you have a surplus or a deficit based on whichever these numbers are, and we'll get to that in just a moment. And then you have the elasticity of import demand, which they represent as 4 times the elasticity of prices reflecting the tariffs, which they have at 0.25 times imports again. So this is what the math looks like. Let's take a look at why this is kind of ridiculous. Saying the 4 times 0.25, well, that equals 1. And 1 times anything is itself. So 1 times imports is just imports. So this was completely irrelevant, not even needed. Why was it here? I don't know. Maybe it's for a later change to their equation, but as of right now, this was unnecessary, and I think they just did it to make it seem like they're doing more math than they really were. So when you break it down, it comes down to tariff rate percent equals exports minus imports over imports. So let's use some real numbers here to represent this. So what I'll have is the tariff rate right here. But let's say the United States is exporting $50 million worth of goods, and they're importing $100 million worth of goods. Now that goes here too because these two are the same. And people would say you could cancel these out, but they need to be represented as a percentage here rather than just a raw number, so that's why you kind of keep it here. So when it breaks it down, again, this is the tariff rate percent. So when you break it down, you have negative 50 over 100 right here. So that equals negative 50%. That is how much the trade deficit with the U.S. is. And this is a hypothetical country. This isn't a real country. So you have a country that is sending more goods to the U.S. than the U.S. is sending to them, 50% more in value. And that is how the Trump administration determined this tariff rate percent. They thought that that was a bit high, so they eventually cut it in half to come to the actual reciprocal tariff rate of 25% for this hypothetical country. And as I said before, this minus 50, this minus 50%, this part of the equation right here, all of these equal the trade deficit between another country. So again, they just used the trade deficit. That's all they used. They didn't do any kind of fancy math. All of this was unnecessary. The problem is they didn't do the math correctly because we actually have a physical number that is managed when it comes to the elasticity of import demand. And it is a number that is managed by economists. Currently, that number sits at 0.945. So the Trump administration used 0.25. Obviously, that does not equal Where did they come up with the 0.25? Well, they just did the impact to the import prices, not retail. No one feels the import prices. Import prices are felt by the business. What we feel is the retail prices. That is what is represented here. And if we were to actually punch that calculation in correctly, the tariff rates would be much lower. And actually, they did that calculation at the American Enterprise Institute. And you can see that many countries would have actually experienced a drop in tariff rate by 3/4 of what they're experiencing. So for instance, looking at this chart, everything in this column is the rate Trump imposed. Everything in this column is the rate that should have been imposed had they used the correct math. Now, obviously, every country, including Penguin Island, received a base rate of 10%, which is why from about here on down, you see that everyone's 10%. But that means that in all likelihood, they should have received a lesser tariff rate. The Trump administration wanted to make a point by showing they're putting massive tariffs out there and yada, yada, America first, whatever, rah, rah. So they wanted the rates to be higher. They didn't like just having little 10% rates on things like China, which the Trump administration put 34%, but doing the math should have only received 10% if you're accounting for that baseline. In fact, Lesotho received a 50% tariff, and their corrected tariff should have been 13.2%. Every country that received a Trump tariff of 37% or lower should have just been stuck at the base rate of 10%. Anyone higher would have been about a quarter of what they actually received if you look at the math here. So I just wanted to highlight, not only is the equation arbitrary and ridiculous, and it's probably meant to just confuse people and make them look like, oh, they're doing such good math and they figured this out and they're smart people up there, when in reality it is just tariff rate percent equals trade deficit. That is all they needed to say. But that didn't seem as smart, and economists and even most lay people understand that you can't base tariffs on trade deficit because there are far more aspects and things that impact trade deficits than just supply and demand of each side, each country. I mean, even Trump's own administration has favorable trade deals on purpose with other countries so that they can import goods that are much cheaper for the American people than they would be normally manufacturing themselves. That's why places like Cambodia and Laos, Vietnam, have huge trade surpluses with the United States. And I just wanted to show that with you guys. This was kind of a long video, and I hope that you learned something from it.